Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Empowered Hour. Today, I am very excited. I have Allie here. Allie, aloha.
Hello, aloha, Tasha. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show today. I'm super excited to have the conversation with you.
Of course. Yeah. I was excited to meet another podcaster. I wanted to just have you share your background, where you're at in the world, and your main focus for your podcast.
Sure, of course. So I'm Allie Brooke. I live in New York. So you may hear a little bit of a New York accent coming out as I talk. So just warning everyone now. I'm the host of the Growth Mindset Gal podcast. And I am also a middle school social studies teacher over in New York. So I kind of use like the similar sphere of teaching and podcasting, kind of meshing them into one. And I'm really super into mindset and how shifting our mindset can truly improve the way we respond to the world around us and changing the stories that our anxieties and our egos are telling ourselves in our heads and just living our lives to our true authentic self rather than, the stories and anxiety spirals that we say to ourselves all the time.
Yeah, well, this is such a great topic, especially for my viewers. A lot of people who have gone through like empowerment self-defense or worked with me, they do have a lot of anxiety, and they're going through and they're processing the different stuff that's happened in their lives, and they're really ready to make change. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, because that's your thing. What are certain tips or tools that you suggest to your viewers when it comes to changing their mindset?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I'm all about using very simple and effective routines in like our everyday life, because changing your mindset isn't like, I'm going to do something tomorrow and then I'm just going to be all sweet and dandy. It's definitely a process, and instilling very important habits for your mindset in your daily routine is really something that helps you shape your new perspective on your life. So a couple of the tips that I have on my mindset journey, the number one thing I started doing was journaling. That's having a wonderful conversation and dialogue with yourself. It doesn't have to be every day. I did it every weekend because that's when I was the most free. I'd wake up in the morning, I would sit down, I have my coffee right next to me, and I would just brain dump for 10 minutes. How did my week go? How was work? How was I feeling? Am I grateful for anything? Right? Kind of really reflecting on the week. And I would just release my emotions. And then what I would do is I would write down like three things that I was grateful for. And it'd be like the little tiny small things, like my commute was on time. I was able to get my favorite coffee. It was beautiful out throughout the work week, like very simple things to kind of like romanticize your life a little bit. Cause when you're in the daily, grind and very mundane, weekdays, it gets very tiring of like, is this all my life is? Is this all it's going to be? And so we kind of sometimes feel stagnant. So in those journal entries, I really want to focus on the gratitude of the everyday. The last thing that I would do is then manifest what I want the week ahead to look like. What are some of the goals I want to accomplish next week? How do I want to feel about myself next week? How do I want to like interact with others? Because as a teacher, I interact with a lot of people, and that could be, very mentally and emotionally draining. So I make sure that in those journal entries with the manifesting the goals for next week, I also set up time for like taking care of myself. So definitely journaling was a big one to like kind of open the scope of my mindset. Another big thing that I did was I did go to therapy. That was a huge moment for me, was going to therapy and getting an unbiased professional opinion on what was going on, because I do have generalized anxiety, so I just wake up like anxious. That's just kind of how my brain works. And talking to someone that can kind of unravel your brain and kind of unravel the stories that you're telling yourself and be like, well, why do you feel that way? How come you reacted in that way? Could we have done something better? And then when you're able to have a conversation with someone, you're like, oh, that's maybe why I was feeling that way. That's why I reacted so harshly. That's why I have such low self-esteem, right? When they can pinpoint different reasons for things that are happening. So if people have access to therapy, I highly recommend going to talking to someone, even if we're with a life coach as well, talking to someone just with a third person perspective of your life. The last thing that I would highly recommend is really instilling like wonderful self-care routines for yourself and what like works for you, right? Not it doesn't work for everyone waking up at 5 a.m. and going to work out. Like some people love that, and that's totally fine. But finding self-care routines to help you replenish your cup. You cannot be your best self and serve others too if you are mentally drained and just your nervous system is very low. So things that I will do is I love reading. I love like taking a moment just to read a good book and kind of escape for a little bit. I love spending time with myself and just like being with myself. And that's kind of where I do my journaling as well. I also love working out, like moving my body, having that like mind body connection. And so doing simple things in your daily routine, such as journaling, talking to someone, right? And then finding a self-care routine. Those are really simple ways to start improving your mindset right away.
Allie, this is such great advice. I know that for myself, it took a really long time to get into that space. I've done therapy for over 10 years and I absolutely love it. I highly recommend it to all of my clients. It's interesting as you were talking about setting yourself up for success and evaluating how you felt throughout the week. There's this book, it's called Triggers. It's by Marshall Goldsmith, and he actually goes to all of these different locations. He works with CEOs and helps them with the different triggers, and usually works with their staff and interviews all of them. And one of the things that he has everyone do is an evaluation of themselves. So like at the end of the week, they have these goals of things that they want to accomplish. And at the end of the week, they evaluate themselves on like a scale of 1 to 10. How did I feel like I performed? How present was I? What were certain things that I did for myself? So it's really interesting, and it definitely is like in alignment with the stuff that you're talking about. When it comes to your personal struggles with anxiety, talk to us a little bit about that with your own empowerment journey. What was that like?
Ooh, well, it's very interesting because I didn't really take action on my anxiety till I was in my 20s. But when you think back on your life, you're like, was I always anxious? And I remember just little flutters here and there as a kid where like I'd be in class and I would just feel like this like uneasy feeling and like raising my hand and like stuff like that. And then I would like feel like maybe anxious in certain situations. A little bit of social anxiety would happen where I would feel very like overstimulated, like in big crowds. And I would much rather like be home in a nice peace and quiet. But I could take like social things in like bits and pieces. And then all of a sudden, when I got out of college and I started working actually with my teaching job, all of a sudden, you're a full blown adult. So you're like, whoa, there's not maybe the security of like school and living at home and things like that. All of a sudden, now you're an adult. And all of a sudden, I felt this big, huge increase of the anxiety that I think I already maybe had in me. It just intensified then as an adult, or maybe I became just more aware of it. And I remember I was going to work and I take the train to work and I'm just like sitting on the train and just feeling this overflow of intense anxiety. And my like heart was, racing. I was sweating. I felt a little bit nauseous. And I'm like, why am I feeling? It was like a regular day too. I'm just going to work, like no big deal. And I'm thinking to myself, I have a great job. It was my dream career as a teacher. Okay. I have a great family. I have great friends. I'm in a great relationship with my significant other, Nate. I was like, why am I feeling this like overarching anxiety? Like everything that like I wanted my life to look like, it looks like right now. So why do I feel this way? And I even texted my sister because I was like, this is like the most weirdest feeling I ever had. And it was because, and I learned this from then going to therapy, it was because I like in this huge like perfectionist, imposter syndrome kind of all mixed into one with anxiety where I always want to do the right thing, right? I always want to be perfect. I don't want to make a mistake. If I make a mistake, it's like the worst thing. And I always went to like worst case scenarios. And I was constantly like stuck in my head. And I was constantly worried about the future and like regretting the past. And I was never very present. I noticed that a lot where even at work, I'd be teaching a lesson, but I would be anxious about like the next day or whatever that it was. When I was hanging out with friends, I was, laughing and having a good time, but then also I was anxious about maybe something going on in work or with family or whatever it was. And so I was sitting here and I was like, why am I going to live my life this way? Why am I constantly going to be ruled by the voices and the stories that are going inside my head? And I would do these worst case scenarios that had no like evidence that those things were going to happen. And I started talking to, my therapist about like, why do I have anxiety? Why do I feel this way? And once you kind of dive into your childhood and your inner child and what kind of experience happened to you when you were a kid, shapes the way you see the world as an adult. Once I heard that, I was like, whoa, like that completely changed the world for me. And she was asking me like, okay, like, why do you think you have this perfectionist, imposter syndrome sort of deal? And it was because when I was younger, I am the second child. And so when I was young, I was always the good kid. So I always did the right things, where my older sister, she's kind of the wild card. So a lot of my parents' attention was on her. And so I was kind of left to deal with maybe my own emotions, deal with my own worries, because they always said, oh, Allie's always the good one. Allie can take care of herself. She's self-sufficient. We don't have to worry about her. So now as an adult, I have that persona of, yeah, I always need to have it together. I always need to be the good one. I can't make a mistake. And that's where a lot of my anxiety is deep rooted, because my anxiety is cultivated in the fear of failure or the fear of like not being enough.
Yeah.
So definitely going to therapy and realizing how your childhood shapes your adulthood is a complete game changer for that.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing when you actually go to therapy. I think that it's wonderful to have someone who basically, it's a nonpartisan party.
Mm-hmm. Non-biased. Yep. They don't know about it.
Unbiased, confidential.
Mm-hmm.
So nice to just be able to sit there and then talk about a whole bunch of stuff. I know that for myself, it was, when I first started going, it was very much like a weekly thing of us just sort of sitting there and kind of looking at each other and
It's like dating. It's like awkward.
Yeah, me talking about the day to day, and them asking me questions, but never really scratching the surface or getting too deep into things. It took me a while to actually get comfortable to do that. Do you have a time like that for you, or was it just like, no, I'm going to delve in, let's do this? What was that like?
It was a little bit like that at first. So actually, when I first started do therapy, I honestly didn't want to tell anyone, because when I did start, it was like that stigma of like, oh, you go to therapy because you're broken. And we know like that's not correct. But that's kind of, again, that's what I was thinking. So I actually started BetterHelp, which is like that online therapy. And so you can like kind of like text them and they find, a therapist for you. And it was more informal than actually going to like a therapist in their office.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of like a trial and error, because like I was texting my therapist rather than like being in person. So it was kind of a little awkward at first, where they're like kind of scratching at the surface questions and all of those things. So it kind of felt a little impersonal because it was online. So then once I was like, I'm a person where like I'm in the experience if I'm at a place. So I need to be like in a therapy, office.
Yeah.
So I found a therapist that was near me, and it was specifically with women with anxiety, which I was like, oh, like this is great. It's not just like a general
me.
please come help me. So I found them and I went my first day, and my therapist, she was super sweet. And she was saying how she was just asking like your typical like questions, just getting a feel for like my personality. And she said something that made me like break away like the wall automatically. She goes, it's so funny. You remind me so much of myself when I was your age. Cause she's, a little bit old. She's in her 40s. And when she said that, the whole like like the fear of the judgment of what is she going to think of me kind of broke away because she made that statement. And I've been
Mhm.
seeing her for about 2 years now.
Nice.
And, we talk like it's once you break that awkward wall, me and her hop on, we do Zooms or I go in person sometimes. And it's just like two gals sitting down for coffee and just like talking about life. That's what it does eventually become. And like I said, it is kind of like dating where like, at first it may be like a little bit awkward, but then once you get more comfortable with each other, the experiences and conversations grow. But I definitely recommend finding a therapist you feel you can be your whole self with. You're not like putting on a show. Like if I didn't like my therapist now, I would have switched again. Like it's okay to switch. You're not going to hurt their feelings. It's, people were like, oh, like when you switch your therapist, are they going to be mad at you? No, they're not. It's fine. Especially because when you go to therapy, the point of it is to unravel everything and kind of put yourself out there to then heal. If you're putting on, a pony show for them, they can't help you heal with your mental health.
Exactly.
So I don't want people like kind of going in and thinking, oh, like the first therapist I find, that's who I'm going to stay with. Even if you don't maybe find, them useful, it's okay to kind of jump around and switch till you find someone that definitely works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it took a pretty long time for me because I was dealing with um, basically I had a stalker. And so I had an attempted sexual assault.
Mhm.
So I had to actually go to therapy and see these people. But I started out with a man and it was just like, oh, this is awkward. Can't really, don't
Yeah, I didn't even go
really.
towards a man. Yeah.
Yeah, it was more so like who was available. And then yeah, and then after that, when I started seeing women, I was like, oh,
Oh, it's so much better.
so much better.
Mhm.
Yep. And then yeah, and the therapist that I have now, she's like maybe 1 or 2 years younger than I am, but she's amazing. And it's just really nice because there's a very free flow conversation. And it's really interesting, as you go along, that judgment that you feel, like the worry of like, oh my God, they're not going to like me. It's like, well, it's their job to focus
Yeah.
on helping you. Like you can't really just, um, yeah, you can't not share certain things because you're embarrassed. Like that might be the thing that's going to be the breakthrough for you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So when it came to your childhood, you talked about how there were certain things from your childhood that you recognized. Some of it had to do with anxiety, the fact that you were a middle kid. Was there something like an event for you that like set the ball rolling, or do you feel like it was all these little things?
I think it was definitely all the little things where like when I was a kid, I always felt like I always had like I had a great childhood. I have loving parents. But it was kind of the little things that you don't realize until it's all like in hindsight, where like, oh, like that's where these things are coming from. Because I know my parents did the best that they could with what they had. And you have to, when you're an adult, you also see your parents as people rather than like these superheroes. Um, but I would remember, a lot of attention being geared towards my older sister, just because she was a little bit more with the wild card. Like I said, she was a little bit more emotional, where I was more stoic in my own personality. And that was because I didn't want to be a burden to my parents because they were always so involved in taking care of like my sister. And it's
Mm.
really funny now because like as an adult, me and my sister are like best friends. But when we were 5 years apart, so we were in very different stages of life when we were kids.
Yeah.
So we did not get along very well as children. So it was also at that part where my sister also made me feel like very low self-esteem because like she was 15 and I was 10 and I just wanted to play with her, you know what I mean? Because she's my sister, she's my friend. But she'd be like, no, like go away, you're not fun, you're embarrassing me, like typical like 15-year-old, like I don't want to hang out with my 10-year-old kid sister. Um, and so that kind of relationship that we had definitely took a toll on me too, feeling kind of like I'm always second best or living in my sister's shadow sort of deal. And also, I did struggle with weight when I was a kid. I was always a little bit, on the chubbier side. And so I had a lot to battle with self-image because both my mom and my sister were very self-image, like important. Like they went on all the fad diets, you know what I mean? They're always obsessed with the way that they looked, where I was more of like a tomboy athletic. So I was just kind of like living my life and things like that. And then, so I would always be kind of like compared with my sister. So I think when you have a sibling that's like the same, gender as you kind of do run into that of like being compared to each other all the time. And what I was always in her shadow with, we went to the same schools and everything like that, like, oh, like you're Erica's little sister, and that's just like who I was, and like I couldn't have like my own identity. So then my own identity was then being the smart one. Like that's where I found the outlet of like my own identity in myself, was I was the good kid, I was responsible, I was the smart one. So kind of those little like parts of like the little digs here and there, the little comparison here and there, the little body image issues here and there. Like I even remember when I was a kid, since my sister, she definitely was skinnier, my mom was skinnier, that they would like try and get me to go on these diets. But I was like a little kid, I was like 8, it's like, so you're still in that developmental stage.
Yeah.
So I think constantly being like judged for either my personality or my appearance and things like that in the family realm definitely like brought it into my adult life, and me always like second guessing myself or telling myself stories, because even the little digs of, oh, like your sister is so good with the boys and you're so shy, like you need to be more like your sister to go flirt. And I was like, no, like I don't like let them come to me, like I don't care, like if they flirt with me. I was not like boy crazy, like if you will. And so like I said, those little digs, they build up after a while, so it wasn't this big explosion one day. But actually going to therapy helped me then realize that. And then I was able to then approach my mom and my sister as an adult and being like, hey, like, you were a great parent and you were a good sister, but when I was younger, you guys, really, said a lot of, things to me that really affected my self-esteem, my confidence in myself, my identity. Because now like my mom and my sister and I were all in a good place. And talking to them about it, they had no idea, like they didn't even realize the
Yeah.
things that they said really had that big of an effect on me. So I definitely think when you realize the things that kind of curated the anxieties, the low self-esteems that you're having right now and as an adult, and then approaching those and like acknowledging them, can also definitely heal you in the process of then growing your mental health.
Nice. So with the podcast, were you already helping other people with this mindset process, or were you like, I'm going to start a podcast because I've been going through this? So
yeah, that's a great question. So I actually started it with my students.
okay.
So my school initiative, and I started this podcast in like 2021. So it's been like a year and a half. And so my school initiative was really into growth mindset, social emotional learning. And I really liked the idea. I thought that was such a great idea, with us like understanding like how, meditating can help you like regulate your emotions, how your mindset can shift your success in your life and all these things. And I was like, wow, like this is like amazing stuff that we're like instilling in our school. And then the pandemic hit, and so we went fully remote, so no more classroom, no more seeing our kids in person. And it was very isolating for both us as teachers, both them as students. Everyone was very afraid of what the world around them was going on and like what's the next step. There was a lot of loss that was happening. And so I felt very, very low in my mental health around this time. I started this podcast in January of 2021. So I felt very, very low. Anxiety was super high. I felt very hopeless, very isolated, because my dream career of being a teacher was also then taken away because of the pandemic. And then I had students, that lost their family members. I lost family members. So it was very just a dark, dark time mentally. And then I was like, the outlet that helped me get through it was listening to mindfulness podcasts. And I was like sitting there one day and I was like, you know what? because teaching was just very draining at that point, is there another outlet I can use, like my educational and teaching background, to kind of dive into, to kind of push my passion in maybe another direction to help me get out of this funk that I was in? And so then I just, Googled, hey, how do you make a podcast? And then what mic do I need? And, all those things. And then I started making a podcast. I also was reading so many like self-development books. I love reading those as well. And so I was taking what I learned from therapy along with what I was taking away from self-development books, and then also making them into podcast episodes, because my thing that makes me feel fulfilled is teaching people. Me figuring out information and then sharing it with others makes me feel super happy. And I think that's definitely my service in this world, is to do something like that. And so starting a podcast really helped me get out of that funk that was going on with teaching. And then it was also nice for my own mindset of like, I would make an episode and I was like, wow, I feel so much better after making an episode. It was kind of like a little therapy with myself.
Yeah.
And so it was just a nice feeling that like, I'm still making a difference. I'm making an impact for people that are probably going through the same things that I'm going through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just thinking, so if you could give some advice to somebody who is there in that moment where there's anxiety, it's high, they're trying to shift their mindset, what would you share with them?
What I would share with them is you have the power. That's the number one thing. You have so much power within yourself. I know anxiety is probably at a high. You probably are in a very low state with your mental health. And the thing is, we always have a choice. The power is within you and you always have a choice. Because life is going to throw some terrible things at you. Okay? And I know everyone is probably listening at some point in their life has unfortunately experienced a very terrible thing. And then we're met with a choice. Do I learn and grow from this? Or do I stay stuck in the victim mode of this and let this be my identity, my story, and things like that? And I've learned also from therapy is that don't react to life. You need to respond to life. Where I used to be very like reactive to things. Like I could go 0 to 100 real quick because of my anxiety. I was very irritable all the time. So I could be laughing with you and then something triggers me of some sort. And then I could be like 100 miles, like mad, angry, and like furious if things maybe like didn't go my way or what it was.
Yeah.
And so learning how to make the choice of, okay, life just threw this at me. What's my decision? Am I going to be angry and upset and react heavily to it and then stay there and not grow? Or am I going to feel the emotion? Right? Because you should definitely feel whatever emotion is thrown at you. Okay, whether it's being angry, upset, sad, frustrated, anxious, feel that emotion. Be like, okay, why am I feeling like this? And then release it whatever way you need to release. Maybe you need to go move your body in some way. Maybe you need to journal. Maybe you need to talk to somebody about it, whatever that you need to do. And then be like, okay, what's my next step? How am I going to learn from this? How am I going to grow from this? Because that's kind of where I was at with the lull of teaching during the pandemic. I was feeling frustrated. I was anxious. I was irritable. I was so frustrated with what the world was looking at. And I was like, am I going to just stay here and be angry? Or can I look for an opportunity? I was working from home. So I had all this time to look up how to start a podcast in my free time, because what was I doing? Sitting in front of a computer. I had the time to do something that would then transfer the energy into something positive. So definitely, if you're feeling in a very low place right now, just remember it's okay to feel that emotion, but don't stay there. And you have a choice to then decide, how are you going to respond to this moment rather than react to that moment?
Such wise words. So thinking about your younger self, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
One piece of advice, I would always say, stay true to who you are. Because when you start people pleasing, when you start the fear of judgment, you really limit yourself and you lock yourself in like whatever box you put yourself in. Because when we're kids, think about it. When we're young, we're our authentic selves. We're running around, we're having a good time. Then all of a sudden, like middle school kind of happens. And I see this with my students. Middle school happens, and all of a sudden, the fear of judgment and just being aware that people notice the things that you do and trying to fit in and people pleasing, that's where it starts. And then
Yeah.
it doesn't stop until honestly, like your late 20s, early 30s, because then you figure out like, oh, like, why am I doing this? I should just live my life.
Yeah.
So definitely a big advice is do the things that make you happy and enjoy your life. Because when you are afraid of what people think of you, what you do, what others say, because they want you to like you, then you're out of alignment with yourself and your mindset suffers for it. I think I'm very heavily anxious because I cared so much of what people perceived of me because of how I grew up. And so as I'm learning to kind of let go of that fear of judgment, of in control and people pleasing, what other people think of me, I do then see my anxiety dwindling down slowly as the process is going, because I feel more comfortable in being free with my most authentic self.
Awesome. Allie, how can people find your podcast and how can people find you?
I am definitely Instagram. I am at the Growth Mindset Gal on Instagram. That is my hub. And there's a link in my bio where you can find all of my stuff. You can find all my other accounts of TikTok and Facebook and all those wonderful things. And you can find my podcast also on that link. And that's where you can find me. That's my major hub.
Awesome. All right. Well, Allie, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to go on to your podcast coming on soon.
I know. Tasha, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I think we had an amazing conversation, and I'm also excited for you to then hop on my podcast. So guys, she's also going to be on my podcast. So stay tuned to the wonderful conversation that we're going to have. So thank you again so much, Tasha.
Awesome. Aloha.